The Christmas Cuckoo by Mary Jo Putney. Most everyone knows the cuckoo bird derives its name from the repetitive call it makes, but there's another very interesting and unique fact about the cuckoo bird. It is also known for its somewhat sneaky behavior called brood parasitism. You see, the cuckoo bird lays its eggs in the nest of another bird species. The unsuspecting host birds then raise the cuckoo chicks as their own. Typically, the cuckoo chick hatches earlier, grows faster, and sometimes pushes the host's eggs or chicks out of the nest to ensure it gets all the attention and food. The fascinating behavior is one of the reasons why in folklore the cuckoo bird and its name is associated with deception and trickery. Which brings us to our story by Miss Putney. Jack Howard, a major in the 51st Regiment, has been called home to England, selling out of the Army after learning his uncle and cousin had been killed. And since his father has been dead since he was a young boy, he now finds himself the Earl of Winstoke, not a title he had ever wanted or expected. But he was raised by his uncle, and the man had purchased his commission. But Hazelwood had never felt like home, and the idea of heading there after years as a military man was not something Jack looked forward to, especially since his aunt, the Countess, as she had always been referred, as if she was the only one in the whole of England, had grand plans for Jack, a list of them, as her secretary, Mr. Weasel, proceeded to reveal to him as soon as he crossed the threshold of the inn where he finally found Jack. Jack had hoped to have an ale, some much needed sleep, and a nice meal. A hot one, the kind he hadn't partaken of since he couldn't remember. But Mr. Weasel, or rather the Countess, had other ideas. The reading the list commenced right after Mr. Weasel handed Jack his new calling cards, freshly printed and in a gold case, of course. There were some people the Countess wished him to call upon before he left London, but of course he could not do so until he was properly attired. They were to leave immediately for Mr. Weston. The renowned tailor to the aristocracy had promised to produce some decent clothes for him overnight. Naturally, the garments would not be up to his usual standards, but at least he would be presentable, with a more appropriate wardrobe which would arrive at Hazelwood within a week. Ignoring Jack's complaints, the secretary continued. One of the Countess's cousins had agreed to instruct Jack on how to go on in society, but there would only be time for one lesson tonight. Then the secretary's gaze fell to Jack's shabby top boots, and the little man pursed his lips disapprovingly. "Those boots will have to go." Jack stopped in his tracks and glared at the man. "Perhaps Hobie can find time to fit you for a new pair tomorrow morning. I have reserved rooms for you at the Clarendon, and we should be off." "What's wrong with this end?" Jack was dangerously close to exploding. "Oh no, this is hardly suitable for you." This went on and on until Mr. Weasel made one last demand in an arrogant tone. "The Countess said you might prove recalcitrant." That was it. Jack left the parlor. He was about to cool when the haughty secretary followed him out and made his last fatal remark. "The Countess will be most displeased." Jack happened to be standing next to a loaded stagecoach about to depart. "Do you have room for another passenger?" "If you hurry," the coachman called back, and Jack did. With no notion where he was headed, he climbed in the last seat on top of the moving coach, bound for it did not matter where, as long as it was away from London and Mr. Weasel. Of course, this is only the beginning of the story. Add a friendly farmer as a companion on the stagecoach, whose idea of warming one on a snowy winter night 3 days before Christmas by way of flask of straight whiskey, and on Jack's empty stomach, and Jack falling soundly asleep at an inn where they had stopped to change horses. The farmer tried to no avail to awaken the man who hadn't slept in days. so he ensured his bag was let down and paid the innkeeper to watch out for the big man. When a handsome young lady arrives expecting a Christmas guest by the name of Captain Jack Howard, the confusion begins. Explaining he is the major, Jack Howard and the young lady, in a rush to return to the warmth of her home and her sister, insists the promotion must have come after her brother's last letter and urges the man to get aboard her gig. The still very intoxicated Major Jack Howard is only too happy to oblige and escort the lady home. One thing leads to another, of course. Jack, after sobering, tries to explain, but is continually cut off by the controlling, overbearing eldest sister. Well, you know where this is going. The side and backstories are sweet, and the cuckoo clock, the only thing left after the father's inheritance is stolen by an unsavory neighboring nobleman. Of course, the clock plays an integral part in the story, especially when Major Jack Howard, believing himself to be playing the part of a cuckoo, offers to repair the seemingly broken clock. After learning so much about the family, he doesn't want to leave this warm and loving home, and especially the eldest sister Meg, who had dragged him home believing him to be the captain. Of course, the loving brother and the captain, Jack Howard, arrive for Christmas, and the major is revealed as a fraud. Except the captain and the brother had heard all about the major and completely ignored the fact that he'd been in the household with his sisters for 3 days unchaperoned. And you can imagine Meg's response. This was a delightful, fast read. I read it an A and with a heat level of a 1.